There's a good chance that you're familiar with the story of the Grand Duchess Anastasia, youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II. While it was reported that she had been killed along with the rest of her family in 1918, at least 10 different women in history have come forward to claim that they were the Grand Duchess Anastasia. And while the story of Anastasia has been popularized in films and fiction enough that you've probably heard the story, what you might not know is that the Grand Duchess Anastasia was not the first child of a Tsar to have supposedly died as a child, only to have adults come forward years later claiming to be them. Because at the turn of the 17th century, in a time in Russia that was so full of strife that is referred to as the time of troubles, at least 3 different men rose to power claiming to be the murdered Prince Dmitry, youngest son of Ivan the Terrible. It is history that deserves to be remembered. In 1591, Tsarevich Dmitry, youngest son of Ivan the Terrible, died in the city of Oglich. Dmitry and his mother had been sent to Oglich after Ivan's death in 1584. Maria Nagaya, Dmitry's mother, was either the 5th or 7th wife of Ivan the Terrible. Sources disagree. But as the Russian Orthodox Church only recognized the first 3 marriages, by any measure Dmitry did not have a strong claim to the throne. Maria suspected foul play, however, in the form of Boris Godunov, advisor to Dmitry's half-brother, Tsar Fyodor, and the de facto ruler of Russia. She was not the only one. And as the church bell in Oglich rang out the news, the townspeople rose up to protest the suspected assassination. Godunov sent a force to quell the discontent, and after executing some of the townspeople, he demonstrated his authority by punishing the church bell. Yes, the bell. He had it cut down, had its tongue symbolically removed by removing the clapper, had the bell publicly flogged, and then exiled the bell to Siberia. An official commission was sent to determine the cause of Dmitry's death, and they determined that the 8-year-old Tsarevich had fallen on his own knife during an epileptic seizure. He was buried and for a time forgotten. His mother was forced to take the veil in a nunnery. Dmitry's father, Ivan the Terrible, was born in 1530 and ruled Russia from 1533, first as the Grand Prince of Moscow and later as the first Tsar of all Rus. He was a member of the Rurikid dynasty, which had ruled in one form or another over parts of Russia since the 9th century. Ivan's reign heralded many changes that would affect the later history of Russia. He was the first Russian ruler to be crowned Tsar of all Rus, a deliberate and important change, meant to emphasize his power as a sole ruler, and an explicitly religious one as well, with divine right to rule. He instituted a number of reforms that would affect the trajectory of the nation. He revised the law code, ordered the construction of St. Basil's Cathedral, and instituted a number of councils and a feudal Russian parliament. Ivan also established a standing army. He greatly expanded Russian territory and fought wars with mixed results against Sweden, the Ottomans, Poles, and Lithuanians. But Ivan left a complicated legacy. Although Ivan's epithet, the Terrible, was not intended to give the modern connotations of evil or bad, it's actually more properly translated as the Formidable, and he was generally well liked. Ivan the Terrible was given to occasional bouts of rage and sometimes mental instability, something which only grew worse after the death of his beloved first wife, Anastasia Romanova. In 1570, he ordered an attack on the city of Novgorod, which he accused of being disloyal. The estimates of the death toll differ. The first Pskov Chronicle estimated the death toll at 60,000, while some historians number the deaths around 2,000 or 3,000, including the archbishop, who was hunted to death. Almost as disturbing, in 1581, Ivan the Terrible struck his 27-year-old son, Ivan, the heir to the throne, with a scepter during an argument. The blow proved fatal, and Ivan V died on November 19, 1581. His death would lead to the unwinding of the Rurikid dynasty. When Ivan died of a stroke during a game of chess in 1584, he left his 3rd son, Fyodor I, as Tsar. Fyodor, good-natured but simple-minded, was sidelined while Boris Godunov, a former advisor of Ivan, ruled from the background. It was Boris who was in charge when Ivan's son Dmitry was killed in Oglich, and Boris who punished the Oglich bell. When Fyodor died childless in 1598, Godunov was made Tsar. It was then that the troubles began. The time of troubles in Russia refers to the period after the death of Fyodor, the last Rurikid Tsar, until 1613, when the first Tsar of the Romanov dynasty was crowned. This period was marked by strife, war, and a famine caused when extremely cold summer temperatures wrecked Russian crops between 1601 and 1603. The famine resulted in the deaths of nearly a third of Russia's population, almost 2 million people. Godunov was unable to provide stability. He attempted to feed the poor in Moscow, which led to refugees flocking to the capital. Meanwhile, armed bands terrorized the countryside, and hunger and disease ravaged the country. Into this crisis stepped a man who would begin one of the oddest series of events in Russian history. In 1603, a man named Dmitry appeared in the Poland-Lithuania Commonwealth, claiming to be Ivan the Terrible's son, the Dmitry who had supposedly been killed in 1591. He claimed to have escaped death when the assassins mistakenly killed another boy. Even his mother would eventually confirm the story. Known to history as False Dmitry I, Russia was rife with discontent and ready to accept a change in leadership. In 1604, False Dmitry I invaded with an army of Poles, Lithuanians, Russian exiles, German mercenaries, and Cossacks, and began a series of wars that were so defined by men claiming to be the Tsarevich Dmitry that the wars were called the Dmitriads. Tsar Godunov's position was weak. He denied False Dmitry's claims, insisting instead that he was a runaway monk, although it is unclear what evidence he had. Godunov's many enemies gathered to Dmitry, sensing opportunity. Fighting only 2 engagements and badly losing the second, False Dmitry I would have failed if not for the timely, or perhaps untimely, death of Tsar Godunov of a stroke on April 13th, 1605. Reluctant Russian forces defected to Dmitry's cause, and on the 1st of June, 1605, Godunov's successor, his son Fyodor, was imprisoned and later murdered. False Dmitry I was crowned Tsar of Russia on the 21st of July, 1605. But False Dmitry I's reign was far from popular. Dmitry is accused of bringing foreign influence to the realm, an accusation made stronger by his keeping Polish soldiers in Moscow and at his court, and marrying the Polish princess, Maria Mninzek, who refused to convert from Catholicism to Russian Orthodoxy. On the 17th of May, 1606, less than a month after his marriage, the Kremlin was stormed by conspirators who had earlier supported False Dmitry I. Dmitry attempted to escape through a window, but broke his leg in the fall. False Dmitry I was shot by the conspirators, his body was displayed, and then eventually cremated and reportedly put into a can and fired from a cannon in the direction of Poland. A nobleman named Vasily Shuisky, a leader of the conspirators, was made Tsar, but he was in a precarious position and he was never generally recognized. But the tale of Dmitry was not over yet. In July of 1607, another man appeared, claiming to be Ivan's son Dmitry. Not only that, this man claimed to be False Dmitry I, having miraculously escaped Dmitry's second death, claiming that, apparently, the wrong guy's ashes had been shot out of the cannon. This False Dmitry was well educated, speaking several languages, and possibly the son of a priest or a converted Jewish person. He was even recognized by False Dmitry I's Polish wife. False Dmitry II invaded Russia again, with some success, eventually camping in Tishino, 12 miles from Moscow, and gathering an army of over 100,000 soldiers. He would come to be known as the Rebel of Tishino. Claiming that he would confiscate the land from the nobles, False Dmitry II became popular with the common folks, but False Dmitry II's luck could not last, as the convoluted politics of Russia's neighbors changed the nature of the game. In 1609, in an attempt to shore up his rule, Tsar Vasily signed an alliance with Charles IX, King of Sweden. But Charles's nephew, Sigismund III, the monarch of the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth, was a rival, and the alliance motivated him to invade as part of his goal of reclaiming the Swedish throne that he had held until 1599. And what all of that really means is that False Dmitry II ceased to be a useful pawn in anybody's fight over the control of Russia. Between the approach of the Russo-Swedish army, the defection of most of his Polish troops to Sigismund III, a potential compromise to place Vladislav, Sigismund III's son, on the throne as the Tsar, False Dmitry II was forced to flee. For a while he lived with and had a child with the Polish wife of False Dmitry I, before he took an army of Cossacks and took control over and ruled most of southeastern Russia. Then he fell prey to internal politics. On December 11th, 1610, Dmitry and several of his nobles took a sleigh to go drinking in the country. Peter Urasov, a Tatar prince and supporter, followed close behind with some of his cohorts, ostensibly as an escort. But Peter had been flogged by Dmitry and was out for revenge. As Stanislaw Żółkiewski, a celebrated Polish commander, would recall in his memoirs, and when the impostor had drunk very well, Urasov drew from his holster a pistol, which he had had ready, and galloping up to the sleigh, first shot him with the pistol, then cutting off his head and hand with his saber, took to the road. But the Dmitry story had still not ended. In 1612, yet another man appeared from a river in Ivangorod, claiming to be Ivan the Terrible's son, at this point killed 3 times. Identified as a former deacon, he convinced an army of Cossacks already raiding around Moscow to support him, and they acknowledged him as Tsar on March 2nd, 1612. False Dmitry III also became known as the Thief of Pskov, as he made the people of the town of Pskov pledge allegiance to him with the threat of destruction. But perhaps Russia was finally getting tired of pretenders to the throne calling themselves Dmitry, because he lasted for only a few months before he was forced to flee Pskov, was betrayed, and then transported to Moscow, where he was killed in July. Anna Anderson, the best known of the women who claimed to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia, sued to be recognized in a German court from 1937 to 1970. It was the longest recorded court case in German history. She was not the Grand Duchess Anastasia. DNA evidence collected in 1991 and 2000 proved definitively that all three of Tsar Nicholas II's daughters died with the rest of the family. Likewise, while the identity of false Dmitry I is still unknown, historians don't believe that any of the false Dmitrys were actually the sons of Ivan the Terrible. Rather, they were ambitious men who saw opportunity during the time of troubles and were exploited by Russia's neighbors, enemies, and a discontented populace. It would not be until 1613 that 16-year-old Michael Romanov, a descendant of the brother of Ivan's first wife, was unanimously elected Tsar of Russia by a national assembly, that the country began to recover. Michael Romanov tied up loose ends by having the son of false Dmitry II hanged and his wife strangled. It was a symbolic end to the wars called the Dmitriads. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.